Okay, we're going to continue on in our Father's Word. This is Genesis 40, verse 20. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about yesterday. We talked about Judah and Tamar. Now, Tamar had to trick Judah. Judah and Tamar are in the bloodline of Christ. But if you look over there in Israel, they study the Old Testament, but they don't know what they're studying. 2% Christian over there in Israel today. 98% of them believe in the Old Testament, first 5 books of Moses, the Torah. They don't believe or they don't know anything about Tamar and Judah are in the bloodline of Christ. Well, Luke 3 tells you who all's in the bloodline of Christ. It gives you the complete bloodline of Christ. All the way from Adam and Eve, all the way through Enoch, through Moses, through now Mother Mary's family, her father, Heli. He had a bloodline back to King David. So his bloodline went all the way back to King David, and it shows it in Luke 3. And Mother Mary's mother was a Levite. Her mother and Elizabeth's mother were sisters. So that means Jesus had a bloodline back to Moses and Aaron. That's why Jesus is called Lord of Lords. So this, we're reading, I'm going to bring it out to you. When we get there, you got Ruth and Boaz. You got Rahab, the harlot. They called her a harlot. The men were jealous of her because she was so successful. And she was a great sales lady. And so they were all jealous of her, so they called her a harlot. But she had Boaz. Boaz and had married Ruth. Ruth was the only Moabite in the bloodline of Christ. And then Ruth married Boaz, and Boaz had Obed, and Obed had Jesse, and Jesse had King David. It's all part of the bloodline of Christ right here, the Old Testament. I'll bring it out to you whenever we get to it. But this is Judah and Tamar. It's all part of the bloodline of Christ. So let's get back to it. We're going to get back in our Father's Word. This is Genesis 40, verse 20. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all of his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Now, this is Genesis 41. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he stood by the river. And suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. And then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed the 2nd time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, the 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and he called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. We each had a dream one night. He and I, each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him out quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved and changed his clothing and came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as the beginning. So I awoke. Also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads withered, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. And the dream are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows, which came up after them, are 7 years, and 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them 7 years of famine will rise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will deplete the land, so the plenty will not be known in the land because of famine following. For it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let the Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, in the eyes of all of his servants. And the Pharaoh said to his servants, Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? And then the Pharaoh said to Joseph, Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and as wise as you. You shall be over my house and all my people, and shall be ruled according to your words. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand, and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the 2nd chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, Bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zenophah-Paneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath,